Hey everybody, how's it going? Andrew here. Just want to say real quick, if anyone is struggling to define their goals or don't have a plan in place with your game marketing, and because of that, it's making things challenging for you, then take a moment, go to my website, rengenmarketing.com, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my email list. Why? Because doing so will get you delivered right to your inbox a free marketing plan template specifically designed for games. Look, I've already verified recently that 2 college professors have used this in their courses and shared it with their students because they understand the value and how helpful it is for them to plan out what their marketing looks like. What's really awesome is simply the fact that these professors are incorporating marketing and this level of marketing into their courses because, again, they understand the value that marketing plays. So it's really exciting to hear this. But on top of that, lots of other people have utilized this template, have found it really helpful for them to further define their goals and provide them clarity and direction in what they need to do to make things happen with their awareness efforts. So again, if any of this sounds like it could be helpful for you, then please just check out the website, rengenmarketing.com, scroll down, sign up for that email newsletter, and then right to your inbox, you will get that free marketing plan template. So again, can't thank you enough for being such great listeners. And now let's get right to the show. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas, and I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about increasing your game's odds of success. So if there's one thing indie studios and developers are always looking to do, it's to increase the odds of their game success. However, trying to pinpoint exactly what that is will always be a challenge to figure out. In today's episode, we're going to explore different concepts that can guide developers and studios to find their own solutions to this universal problem. By sharing objective-based processes and other approaches, we'll reveal valuable insights and opportunities that can be leveraged to help increase your odds of success and do so within your means. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have Caitlin Lafreniere. Did I get that right?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, you did.
With us today. Caitlin, thank you so much for being here today. And it's really great to have you on the show.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And folks, for those of you who aren't familiar with Caitlin, she is the producer for Phantom Compass. And in fact, that's a recent position change for you, correct? Because before you've served as a marketing and communications lead previously, and probably a lot of other really interesting, cool roles there. So congrats on, I guess, the promotion and that new role. Exciting stuff. You're also a content strategist. And what's really cool and interesting is your background wasn't just from it's not always been in games. It's initially in financial services, which is really cool. And you also have 7+ years in hospitality management. A lot of that being 10+ years in customer service. And man, there are so many other cool things about you. But I'm curious, what would you say is one of the coolest, most other interesting things about you that you like to do? Whatever. What's really else that's interesting outside of all these other cool things I just mentioned?
I am a serial hobbyist, basically.
Serial hobbyist.
So I kind of just like picking up hobbies, see what I like, and then I leave everything else or chalk everything else up as experience. So right now I've been taking acting classes for the last 6 months and I'm absolutely loving that. I'm in book club. I play a lot of D&D, so I play every week. I exercise, try to play volleyball in the summertime with my friends in a rec league. Not well, but improving.
Awesome.
Hopefully. I don't know, maybe. yeah, I think that's about it for my hobbies right now, but they might change tomorrow. So
I love it. But that's really awesome. I mean, always trying something out and sticking with some things too, obviously. It's just a great way to explore things. So thanks for sharing that about yourself. But you know what? We do want to dive in a little bit deeper here. And folks, to do that, we're going to have Caitlin go into the Q box round. And for those of you who aren't familiar, it's just a series of quick random questions I prepared here for Caitlin today. So Caitlin, are you ready for the Q box round?
I don't know. Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
all right.
I'm
Awesome.
ready.
All right. So first one is, what's one habit you do to keep a clear and healthy mind?
Well, exercise is extremely important to me. I swear I'm like a dog and I get zoomies if I don't expend energy. So doing a walk in the morning or yoga or going for a run is generally how I keep a clear mind. I also like to write in a gratitude journal. I think it's really important to express gratitude. And cooking seems to put me in like a meditative state almost. It's one of the best ways when I feel frazzled and I just need to, what someone might meditate for, I'll start cooking because that's it really clears my mind.
Wow.
Yeah.
Those are some awesome things. And you know what? I love the gratitude journal one. You don't hear too many people talk about that. At one point I was doing that. I stopped. I think you have now inspired me to take on that habit again. So thank you for sharing that. And cooking, man, it's like, if you want to get in a state of flow and you're cooking, I mean, that sounds like I would love if I had friends or anyone really that got in that state. Can only imagine the amazing things that come out of that like flow of state of mind and everything. And I don't know, that's pretty cool. So thank you for sharing that. All right, next one.
No worries.
Name one thing that motivates you every day.
I would love to say that I'm motivated every day, but that's not true, and won't be true in the future. But one thing that I do when I don't feel motivated is I start out by writing a list of things. Like it's really simple, but when I finish the list, it's a small accomplishment that also allows me to organize my thoughts. The downside of it is I like to write lists like physically on paper. So I have a graveyard of lists on my desk that I'll never use again, but they're there.
You know, I love that. That is something I can completely relate with because I do that myself and can relate to that graveyard of lists like that are stacked up. And then sometimes I'm like, oh wait, I got to go through these again and everything else. So that's awesome to hear. All right.
And sometimes you're not the right way. I like literally just scribble something. It makes no sense, but it's there. It's off of my brain and on a piece of paper. So it helps.
Awesome. All right. And last but not least, and the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing now?
I'm kind of a mood gamer. Actually, the way I consume all media is based on my mood. So I have a lot of games on rotation right now, or the ones that have stuck around for a while is Peglin, Hades, and Tears of the Kingdom. I think I'm trying to force myself to get into Tears of the Kingdom, and I'm actually having a hard time for some reason, and I don't know what it is, but I keep going back to it. I recently just finished Jedi Fallen Order, and I'm hoping to start Jedi Survivor. I play online games often with my friends. I never really play against strangers, but when I do play with friends, I prefer co-op experience instead of like a PvP. So I was playing Diablo 4. I played Grounded, and I just started Gotham Knights.
Awesome.
I'm sure there's more too. Like I like pick up a game for an hour sometimes and then see if I like it. It's the way it's same thing with hobbies. So yeah.
I love it. And it's funny because, geez, I'm finding so many similarities here because one of the areas that I'm like too is like I'm more of a mood gamer, and sometimes to the degree of like seasonality. So like this time of the year, if I'm not making time to play it, I'm at least listening to the OST daily, which is the Skyrim soundtrack. We're playing Skyrim. Now, the problem I face, though, is whenever I put that on, then my son is like, hey, can I play? And then he takes over. So maybe I'll play vicariously by listening to the music.
Yeah, there you go. I do that with Persona 5 sometimes, which I'm like 100 hours in and I need to finish it. But it's just, anyways.
Awesome.
I've got a lot of backlog games too. So yeah.
Yes, don't we all? But at any rate, thank you so much for sharing that. Great stuff. But now, folks, we're going to get into the meat of the discussion here, which is increasing your game's odds of success. Because, let's face it, there's always certain situations and so many things going on where we're really trying to think, hey, how can we do the best job possible to increase our odds? Because there are so many challenges that we're facing. So in light of that, I want to kind of kick things off with this. Regardless of how many successes, stories we hear in games, there's no absolute right way to market a game for success. Though sometimes we may attribute a game success to the resources available to market it. So like some people have more resources, some people have less, right? So what would you say that in what ways do you think this concept should be viewed differently to provide a better idea of how marketing efforts should be dictated and not just a factor of available resources?
I think it's still a factor of available resources to an extent. And I can get into that just being like, everything is a factor of resources, right?
Yep.
Like how much time and effort you can put into something as a studio, as an individual, like if you have the time, if you don't know how to do something, the time that it'll take to figure out how to do something. But I so agree that there's no guarantee when marketing a game. And like, really, it's just, there's thousands of ways to market a game. And it really depends on like the effort and investment that you put into it. And sometimes, you can estimate the returns based on like the effort and investment, meaning like effort would be what resources you have at your disposal. So that could be your time, it could be an employee's time, or just how long it takes one individual to complete something. So something I could do in an hour might take someone else like 6 hours, right? Because I have more experience in it, right? But that all being said, instead of viewing it as a guarantee based on I expended X amount of resources, meaning I am guaranteed to have X results, I actually think of it as you're just increasing your odds for those results to occur. Because there's, like, as you said, nothing can be guaranteed.
Right.
And I kind of want to start off with just a blanket statement of this is my point of view. And it is not applicable to a lot of developers. Like if you're a solo dev and you're just making your passion project, like that's super awesome and fabulous. Good for you that you're able to do that. But if you have a team to support, maybe it's a little bit more applicable. Also, it's freaking rough out there right now. Like, look at all the layoffs. There's so many games get released. Like there's 250 new games released every week on Steam. I'm going to refer a lot more to Steam than other platforms because that's just what I'm more familiar with. But yeah, it's rough out there. But to get back to the point, I feel like there's a lot of indie developers that don't necessarily understand why marketing hasn't worked for them. And they're like, I've announced my game. We put effort in, we did this, and it's just not getting the wish list that I expected. And it's like, well, it's not a magic potion that can sell any game. And I know there's those conceptions or misconceptions in marketing where it's like, I'll give you a pen, you sell me this pen. And it's like, okay, well, your pen is in a pile with all these better pens, and customers are able to try out all these pens. How are you supposed to, like, what? No, it doesn't make any sense when it comes to games. Maybe in a different industry that I can't speak to, it does. So instead of thinking of marketing as a way to support your game, I really like to think as the game as a way to support your marketing. So to me, essentially your game is your biggest marketing asset. And put simply, like your game determines the size of your target market, and your marketing efforts are how you reach and engage with the audiences in that market. So if you have like a super niche game with an estimated target market size of like 1,000 people, no matter how phenomenal your marketing efforts are, even with a guarantee, you likely won't surpass that number, right? Like that's just what it is. There are ways. I mean, there's always a way. There's always possibilities. Nothing I'm saying is absolute, but I'm just saying the odds of actually achieving success beyond that market is kind of slim. There's tons of marketing decisions that you can make as a developer or in development that can help with that. Like modding is one. So like doing like mod.io or Steam Workshop, or like online multiplayer can assist with like expanding your market. But even that, like that's not guaranteed. So
I think you outline a few important things here. And the main one being just like, obviously these can be estimates and everything else, but really identifying, what are the odds, or what is that size, and then kind of playing it from there. Because let's say, even if it is niche, and then you are able to come up with a rough number on what that is, that's like best case scenario. And even if you try to look at, let's say we call it like affinity audiences, or audience that relate to this niche market, that maybe increases things by probably small percentages. Yes, you're expanding that overall size, but it's not necessarily going to be as honed in as your core audience. So it's really, I love how you started to kind of outline this in a very objective way, to kind of start really like thinking about, what these things are and everything. And then it goes back to like, okay, we know this. And now what does that really mean in terms of resources? Because regardless if you have a lot or a little, it at least allows you to be a little bit more focused and objective based with how you're using those resources. So I love that you outlined that. And I know you were talking a little, we started diving in here about, your audience and, your target size and everything else. So I want to kind of go into that a little bit more. I guess the real way to define that and to better understand that size is everything is through some pre-production research. So,
which I advocate for completely.
Awesome. So let's dive into that a little bit. So I'm curious, what are some of the key things developers should research during this pre-production phase to help increase their project's odds of success?
I think it really depends on how early on you want to start that research. Like what trade-offs are you willing to make as a developer? If you're actually going in with a totally blank slate, meaning you don't even know what genre you want to go into, or even potentially the platform, I'd first start listing things that you can deliver. So it is actually kind of going back to resources. For a lot of indie devs, PC first makes sense. For your team, your mileage may vary, and then with the list of the things you can deliver, I would use that as a stepping stone and start researching the primary platform that you want to launch your game on. So for us, I'm going to use Steam as the primary platform that is my go-to, because that's what I am experienced with. So I'd start looking at what genres and themes are underserved. There's so much secondary research that's available online that you can use. All you have to do is a Google search. GameStats.com is great. If you follow Chris Zukowski in the How to Market a Game newsletter, that's also great. He always sends tips, or I think he just sent one out about how you should make a horror game.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And then I'd narrow it down to a few genres, or a combination of a few genres, and then I'd do some social listening. I love me some social listening. And I'd look at a variety of the games like that are within those genres and see. I wouldn't just look at the games that did really well. I actually like to look at games that have high follower accounts, but lots of negative reviews to see if there are opportunities there. And I try to pinpoint where they've missed the mark too, because like that's really important. You can learn from someone else's mistakes. That's invaluable. And then just try to identify any visible gaps in the market that you can fill with the resources at your disposal. Then I would go into like a deeper dive into research, essentially. Once you have that outline and you're like, oh, I see an opportunity with X and Y, I'm going to do that. Then like look at as many games as you can, play as many games as you can. Again, noting, take into account the resources you have and look at the top competitors in that field, because if you can't match the quality or the game that they're producing, then, maybe you wouldn't be able to rival them as a competitor. Maybe you'd be number 10 or number 20, and that's not that bad. That can still be profitable, but just take those things into account and then start ideating.
Yeah.
Right? Play the games, think about, what your game hook is, what your USPs are, what's your strategy, like your game pillars, and then continue playing all the games possible, and seeing what works. This is where you should be working with your game designer and marketing team and everyone else, brainstorming collectively to try to figure out what we can do as a team to make the best product possible.
Yeah.
Then after that, be prepared for I don't want to say the word, but be prepared for the term. It was in a talk the other day, but basically be prepared to kill your babies kind of thing. Those ideas and concepts, it's going to change. It's going to be hard and sad, but they're going to change so much. And sometimes it's really funny to look at a product from concept stage and be like, oh my gosh, what were we thinking to what it is now, right? Or maybe you hit the mark. That's awesome. And then I would start basically showing off my concept art or ideas roughly to the audience that you think that would enjoy it. I would look to Stray Fawn Studios and the Wandering Village for inspiration on that. They're phenomenal and have seen a lot of success. I think you've worked with them actually before. Yeah. And then I would also leverage platforms like TikTok, just because it focuses on top funnel marketing, but I wouldn't start TikTok without a strategy either. So develop a social strategy if you're going to start on a new platform. There's lots of resources for that, like Victoria Tran's blog. I think Jarrett Tan has a really good article on his portfolio too about that. Like I said, there's so many resources out there. So just do your research. And overall, this industry and the user expectations are always changing, right? And I think something that worked yesterday or last week or last month might not be applicable today. So all of your decisions should be backed by research to make sure that you're staying up to date.
Right. Because like you said, these platforms can be very helpful, but hey, they can change overnight. Look at everybody's initial feelings when Twitter, now X, was making some big changes, right? And any moment that could happen. And I want to go back real quick just to recap on a couple things. You talked about social listening. That's awesome, and I agree with you. I think that's one area that a lot of people don't necessarily think about, and the importance of how that can help validate decisions and how you're going to incorporate that potentially into development. Reviews, big one right there. Whether a game's popular or not, and I love that specific example. Hey, they have a big follower account, but then all of a sudden, tons of negative reviews. It's overall mixed reviews. Why? And especially if that's in your market, that what are where do they fall short? Where do they win early on and then fall short on the delivery? And then you mentioned quality, and I believe this was just implied in everything. It was just, folks, when we talk about quality is very subjective, and I would say it's not like you need a high production quality, so to speak. It's more of the quality of the experience. Where is that value for the player? Not necessarily like you need the best artwork in the world, because let's face it, you can't always get that for any or whatever the example may be. So
and your technical implementation too, right? Like when you're thinking about things just from that standpoint. That's why I think a collaborative approach to it and having all the heads at the table to be like, okay, well, this could work and I can do it like that. Okay, perfect. Right? Like just having everyone's viewpoints in the initial stages will simplify things instead of trying to make a product that someone could have spoken up and said, hey, that's not feasible. Right? Like we can't do that with the resources we have. I need a team of 50 people to make this great networked online experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a lot of ideas here in terms of like how to dig in and stuff. But one thing I want to look at too, because we talked about, this target size, right? What are good ways that we can kind of like, we have this ideal target size. What are some good ways to go about, let's say, expanding that a little bit, especially if it's a niche, but even if it's not, it's probably worthwhile to expand the audience or target size anyway. So what are some good ways that we could possibly expand those audience? Again, helping to potentially increase our odds. And a lot of this, let's say, research can probably help give us some insight. So what are some ways that we can expand these audiences?
Well, again, nothing's guaranteed. So like it's, there's always a chance. And sometimes, like maybe your target market is actually bigger than you thought it was, or like you never, right? That does happen where I've seen games. I'm like, what the hell? Like, huh? And it works. But if you're trying to create, and it's fairly difficult too, if you're trying to create like a game genre, like your own new genre or blending a genre that's never been done, that's hard to do in this climate because there's so many games and a lot of those possibilities have been like pursued. And also if you're combining genres, think about like what I would do is actually prepare for the size of your market to be less than the size of the smaller target market, if that makes sense. Which is probably, just off the top of my head, I would actually say it's less than that because it's where those two genres would intersect normally. But I don't have concrete evidence at my disposal to go into that. It's just my hunch. But I do think that there are ways for you to convert users outside of your target market if you get creative with it. And I'm sure there's evidence somewhere on the internet that where someone's done it successfully. I do think it's kind of an uphill battle that doesn't make sense for a lot of indie studios to sink cost and effort into. And I've got to say that there are like other things that I've mentioned, online multiplayer is something that you can include, as well as like mod.io or Team Workshop or like those things. There are things that you can put into your game that could increase your target market or your target audience, I should say actually. But yeah, it depends on your game, your resources. It's so subjective to the actual game that you are making for me to be, I can't give like a blanket statement that would encompass everything.
Yeah. But I mean, I would say in general, because you're right. It's like we say, it's like we can't just, like we let in with, we can't just take one game's or several games success and say like, oh, it's very similar. It's the same market, whatever, it will work for me, because it's very usually not ever the case. Right. But like, just, I think what some things you were saying too really just leads up to, what are different ways to approach this? How can we be a little bit creative? How can we, and again, looking back at, like you said, with the reviews and everything in a different sense, what can we do differently that applies to us or that applies to our game? That's maybe no one else has communicated or done with players before, or the audience before. And well, you can't, it's always hard. And yes, it's helpful for having specific examples, but again, they're not always going to be applicable. And that's part of the challenge with increasing your odds, is thinking outside of the box a little bit. And I know it's sometimes an answer we don't like to hear, but it's a iterative process. It's something that we kind of have to look at and go from there. So good stuff. Here's something interesting that I want to dive into real quick, because it goes into kind of your background a little bit here. Now, because as developers, sometimes we get super close to our projects, right? And it can be hard to remove ourselves. So I would say, looking at things from an outsider's perspective, it can provide all sorts of opportunities and how to market a game. So I'm curious, from your perspective and point of view, how have you applied this approach to seek new opportunities? Let's say, considering that your background has been in like finance and hospitality, I can't talk, management, customer service, all those things. How can this be applied from having a varied background that's not in games, and how you approach these things?
Well, yeah, agree. There's a point where you get too close to your game, which is really why I feel that like user testing and taking a community validated approach to development with an iterative production plan can help not only create a game with a larger appeal, but like it also can help build your community too. Just to add that in. And when you actually look at traditional product development, market research plays a significant role prior to prototyping, and it includes things like establishing your target audience, the product purpose, like what needs does it address, what problem does it solve, and then they also do like a full market analysis prior to that, right? So if you look for inspirations from other industries, like generally that is something I would take away. And then user testing, a lot of the time, is conducted through prototyping and development, meaning like marketing is done throughout every stage. And then for marketing, like I look at data a lot. So qualitative and quantitative. And I try to determine the best way forward with the resources at my disposal. I kind of just do that with life. It's a little lackluster, I guess. But I formulate a strategy based on the insights, based on the data that I've gathered. And then that strategy creates, the sandbox where I'm able to be creative in the way I implement, or the actual tactics that I come up with. And you can't know everything all the time. I would love to say that I'm an expert in all things, but I am totally not. And there are tons of things in my blind spot. And I basically just kind of need to look at, when I'm formulating an opinion on something, I like to make sure that I look at the resources or the information objectively, and then I move forward. I think this method, I can't talk either, geez, comes from like a sum of all my experiences. It's not just my time in finance. I'd actually say I went to Miami Ad School and got like a strategy planning bootcamp certificate once upon a time when I was going to possibly get into advertising. And it really heavily influences this method. It's also why I feel so strongly about like collaboration and ideation as a like in a group working session, because we all have so many different viewpoints that can add value to anything. Right? Like that's just, anyways, that's my perspective on formulating a strategy moving forward in game development, and also in life. Unless you're like, Hideo Kojima and you don't need, you're just this creative genius and you can go into a dark room alone and create the perfect product that everyone's going to want. Yeah. But that's not generally the case.
Right. I got this idea and we're going to do it. But no, I mean, great points. I mean, you know, when you talked about different industries and looking at different industries, I mean, the research behind all these products and services and everything else, these are all tried and true methods that have been done for years. I mean, well beyond even video games or like a thought in someone's head. And, you know, it has its value for sure. And then I think another thing that was really important you called out to is just knowing what you don't know. And because it's like, you know, that there's things, you may have some blind spots, of course, but also it's like not worrying about them, but also making forward based off of what information you've gathered and knowing like, hey, I don't know everything, but I got enough here to take a direction that I feel at least some level of confidence that I can execute upon. So all great stuff. Now I know we're coming on time, but I do want to kind of dive in a little bit too with some like a little bit of iteration and pivoting, but I would say specifically kind of collaboration. You mentioned this earlier and I thought it was really cool that you did. And I want to talk about this a little bit before we close, which is, you know, marketing and development are generally siloed, right? And it really does make it a challenge for some devs and studios to strike that right balance between the two. So I'm just phrasing it this way and want your thoughts, but like instead of focusing on the right balance, like what ways can the two be integrated successfully so it promotes a more collaborative process that benefits both departments?
I'm saying this a lot, but I think it really depends on the studio. Like, especially indie studios, they often have like these bespoke titles or job descriptions, and they're wearing like, or they were multidisciplinary and you're wearing like 1,000 hats. Like you talk to someone like, I'm a designer, a narrative designer. I do 2D art. I do this. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so accomplished. But overall, I think my suggestion is just creating a safe space for open communication is like really one thing to take away. Often marketing doesn't become like aware of product details or features until they've already been implemented, or like once the game's been shipped. So that's something to be aware of. Like something I would suggest beforehand is to like sit down as a team and discuss how you could actually create a more collaborative process. And if you can have someone oversee like the life cycle of development, that's awesome. It's normally known as like a product manager. Which you see some like AAA studios have product managers that kind of oversee like the cohesiveness of the product from like marketing, as well as like overseeing that the vision is being met. Anyways, I would recommend, normally, like you probably can't do that as an indie studio. You're not able to hire someone on specifically for that, but it would be ideal to kind of give someone the role as like the product manager, likely the producer or your project manager, however you've titled that person. There's someone in your team who generally does product management. And that's someone who I would dedicate. It could also be like the director. I could go on. Anyways, I would recommend doing that and having a collaborative process to talk, or a collaborative meeting to talk about the process. And I'd set stakes in the ground. So like when we reach X, we're going to have this meeting to go over, like, is the process working? One. And then I'd also discuss, is the product working? Like, how is it in its current state? What's working, what's not working? What are the unknowns? What do we need from this team member, and this team member so we can move forward? And then just often scrum, like we do scrums, 2-3 times a week. I know some studios that do scrums, like 5-minute scrums in the morning. Like it depends on what works for your team. I keep saying that, but yes, depends on what works for your team. And something too that I also want to mention is sometimes like I would always try to ask how a team member can support another team member instead of putting it like forcing them to work together or saying you need to check in with marketing, because I often find that marketing and game designers feel like they get pitted against each other. Like a game designer is making successions for marketing because they have to do this because marketing told them to do that. And it's not a healthy way forward and doesn't open a good dialogue between the two, which is really needed.
Yeah. No, I you ended perfectly there, because the whole openness of that communication and really promotes that strong collaboration. And then from that, let's face it. Getting an open perspective from your designer, from an artist, from whatever, can really help influence and give maybe even better direction or insight to the marketing team. And then, vice versa. Like, just having these conversations can really open people up to not only be encouraged to speak up and to share their thoughts. Because sometimes we might think like, oh, well, I don't know anything about marketing, so I'm not even going to say what I feel about this, even though, because I'm not the one making those calls. It's not my job, whatever the case is, right? But you're right. So when you have those distinct, like almost obtrusive, or they kind of just are jarring or create some conflict that you don't see, it can be very limiting. So these ideas and suggestions that you shared are really great. And just one, I think probably the key example that we should all try to follow if we can, to really make these things more fluid, more open and everything. So again, all about doing what we can as a team, even if it's with contractors, to really help increase our odds. Because if we're siloed in our own little spaces, in our own little bubbles and worlds, it's going to be hard to do that.
Yeah, it is. Definitely.
All right. Well, we definitely discussed a lot here today on the show. I wish we could have gone a little bit more, because there's so many different areas here. But as we come to a close, I'd love for you to share any tips or suggestions you have for our listeners today about what we discussed.
Yeah. My biggest suggestion, actually, I think, is to do what we just talked about. Hold a team meeting, discuss, how you can work together and see where those ideas can come from, or how you can improve your process or your product. I think that's great. Another thing that I would suggest doing is, it's pretty easy to do passive research in this industry. I've got to say, like, just signing up for all the newsletters. I mean, RenGen has like their own newsletter. There's this podcast if you wanted to actively research. There's also the How to Market a Game newsletter. I'd recommend Simon Carles's Game Discover Co newsletter, Rami Ismail's newsletter, Victoria Tran's. Like, those are some pretty heavy hitters in the industry that impart their knowledge every week, or some of them not every week, and you get it right in your inbox. So that's another thing. And then I'd say try to get feedback early on for your game. You don't necessarily have to announce it to get feedback. I think like you wanna put that in your back pocket to get into a festival or whatever your announcement strategy is. But I feel like there's a way to do that, I know there's a way to do that by even just like communicating and networking within the industry. Sign MNDAs, like say, hey, I'm working on this game. I see you're working on this game too. Do you wanna swap? And just give, a FATUI, like a first time user experience write up, so that I can see where I can improve my game. Don't be an asshole. Like when doing it, obviously, don't burn bridges, be kind and constructive. But that would be 3 suggestions that you could start.
Awesome.
Hopefully.
Absolutely love them. Great ones there. And yeah, there is so much information kind of at your fingertips. There's and it can be a little overwhelming sometimes, but at the same time, it's just like you have a lot to work with. There's no need that this process of research and everything else can't be helpful in moving you forward. because there's just so much available. So thank you for those tips. And we're closing now. I can't thank you enough for being here. But before we do, what are ways people can reach out to learn more about Phantom Compass, connect? Give us some links if you got any.
I'd actually recommend LinkedIn right now. X, formerly Twitter, we're not really active on there anymore, to be quite honest. And connect with me. Like, if you're looking to get into the industry, I don't have a job for you, but if you're looking to get into the industry and you wanted resources to refer to, I can send you links. Just send me a message on LinkedIn, and I definitely don't mind supporting other people who want to get into the industry, or supporting anyone who's in the industry and just wants to learn more. And then check out Phantom Compass's LinkedIn page, follow us. If you want to get in touch with me too, through LinkedIn. LinkedIn's definitely the best way right now until we figure out what's going on with Blue Sky and Threads. Maybe you and I will have a conversation about that after.
Awesome. Yeah. So folks, if you want to connect with Caitlin or find out even a little bit more on, Phantom Compass, LinkedIn's going to be the best place. And yeah, I mean, I really can't thank you enough, Caitlin, for our conversation today. Really insightful. And yeah, let's see how we can, hopefully people can take this away and do what they can to help increase their odds. So thanks again for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.